Welcome to episode 124 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, so the word all spelled out, SEVEN health.com/124.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Real Health Radio. So this week it is another guest interview, and this time I'm speaking to Laura Hearn. So Laura is the founder of the globally recognized online platform Jiggsy, which uses its unique creative tool, the Jigsaw, to connect people affected by eating disorder and mental ill health. Alongside this, Laura shares her experience of recovery from anorexia and how she learned to heal from the inside after spending 7 months in an inpatient treatment center in the US. She delivers bespoke workshops to companies, schools, and organizations developing confidence and identity from within. Laura is also a TV news producer for the BBC and speaks regularly about her own experience of working within a fast-paced and challenging environment. She uses her extensive knowledge within broadcasting to remove the stigma of mental illness in the workplace and to encourage leaders to realize the financial and moral benefits of putting well-being at the heart of everything they do. So I've known Laura for the past couple of years and met her through my partner Ali, as they used to have horses at the same yard many years ago. And so despite the fact that we're up to, I think, 124 of the podcast, and roughly 70 of them are guest interviews, Laura is one of the very few people I've actually met in real life. So yeah, that's the internet for you. So as part of this conversation, we talk about Laura's life story. She lived with anorexia for more than a decade. And so we go through how it all started, the many attempts at recovery, the real driving force behind the behavior and behind the illness, and how she finally was able to recover. And this isn't some Hollywood movie, so it's not so nice and neat, as Laura talks about very openly about returning from treatment and the struggle of readjustment, and then ongoing issues that she has, just like issues that we all have. We also focus on the wonderful work that she's doing now, doing work around mental health awareness and making it a less taboo topic, working with young adults with the Princess Trust to help them build self-esteem and confidence, and also her own company, Jiggsy's Place, and the concept behind the Jigsaw puzzle. So like previous conversations with Laura Dennison and Eve Simmons and Anna-Sophie Reinhardt, this is a very honest episode about what it's like living with an eating disorder and what recovery looked like. So I hope you get a lot out of Laura being so candid and open. So let's get on with the show. Here's my conversation with Laura Hearn. Hey Laura, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks for chatting with me this evening.
Hi Chris, hi.
So to start off with, for those who are unfamiliar with you, are you able to get a bit of background on yourself? And we're going to dig into your story in detail and also talk about what you're doing now with Jiggsy's Place and other work, but maybe just a brief overview of who you are and what you do.
Sure. So my day job is I'm a producer for BBC Television News, and I've done that for around 10 years now. Which I absolutely love, and it's been a great place for me when I moved to London, building a network and stuff around me. But alongside that, since I was about 18, I struggled with an eating disorder, and that kind of flowed into my career and my job, pretty much on and off through my whole teens and 20s, really. And it led to me to, when I was about 28, I had to take about 6 or 7 months off work to go to a treatment center in America, to kind of really try and, get some sort of recovery. I'd struggled for so long over here, both in the NHS system and the private system, and never really found anything that, I don't know, yeah, maybe it was partly I didn't actually want to get well. But then what was on offer to me was very disconnected, expensive at times, and long waiting lists, etc. And it took me to about 28 to realise that I wasn't functioning at work very well. My life was just like passing me by, I guess. My friends had moved on, everyone was getting into relationships, and there I was still doing the same thing in a cycle of starvation, really, and loneliness. So I was very fortunate and was able to go to a treatment centre in California, and that really has been the beginning of my journey of recovery. And that was, I came back in 2012, so it's been a little while now. And yeah, so, and when I came back from that, from America, I kind of slotted back into life in a way, but I became really kind of frustrated with the difference between what I'd learned in America and what was happening over here. And I guess it was at the beginning really of social media. And it led me to create Jiggsy, which is a community and a platform where people share their stories, experiences, hopes, secrets, things that they've not shared before, on a kind of a platform. It's a visual platform. And so I kind of created it because I just felt like I never really fitted in anywhere. And when I came back, I wanted to create a place where people could share these things. That some of the things that I'd done have been crazy in my eating disorder. So I thought if I've done it, other people have, and if I could share some of the things and other people share some things, it would help to connect people and feel not alone. So that's where it began. And now, that was about 2 years ago I started it, and now it's kind of grown into being not just for eating disorders, but mental health issues. And I do lots of work around that, in and out of work and with charities and schools and things. So that's a short version of a long story.
Okay, cool. And we can then go through some of that in more detail. So, yeah, you said you had an eating disorder. If we go back to your childhood, what was eating like? What was food like in your household growing up?
It's a hard one. I really don't remember much of my childhood before the age of about 8. And that is kind of where when my parents split up. And so when my mum remarried my stepdad and I lived with them, I kind of, I remember always feeling kind of overweight and a bit podgy, as it were. And I would be kind of bullied at school. I always felt like I was bigger. Like I remember sitting on toilets and on chairs and things and like pinching my stomach, the extra tires, and just kind of very disgusted with myself. And food was something that I in hindsight, I think I found comfort in. So I would like indulge in big bowls of cereal, like two or three after each other. But then I would not really eat dinner or anything. So there was always dinner there. Like it was never sort of fast food, or mum always cooked, and I did eat food, but there were times I remember I would kind of not have the dinner and have cereal, or I would come home and like pick at bits of cake and kind of convince myself I hadn't eaten it all, but I still felt that whole guilt thing. I remember, it's kind of that guilt shame thing. And I think really looking back, it was a way to comfort my feelings of feeling really unhappy with my parents' divorce. It was quite unhappy at home. There were lots of arguments with my sister and things. And now, at the time, I had no idea what I was doing, but I think that kind of was the beginning of my relationship with food. So if I'm honest, I can't ever really remember when food was not really a thing for me one way or another.
Okay. And so you mentioned, obviously, small examples of how things were maybe less than normal in terms of your eating, but when did it start to really shift and become more problematic?
So I guess that kind of eating went on throughout my school and college life. I never binged or anything, but I do remember having, like, at Easter I would get Easter eggs and I would kind of take them into my room, and I wouldn't just eat, I couldn't just eat half the Easter egg. I was like, well, there's no point eating half of it. I'll eat the whole thing. So I kind of had that mentality, and I felt so guilty afterwards. So that kind of went on. But then I guess my stepfather was killed suddenly in a car crash when I was 18. And I'd planned to go to Australia on a gap year a few months after. And I mean, now my mum says I didn't really acknowledge Michael's death. Otherwise, perhaps I would have reconsidered going off travelling for a year. But I didn't. So I went off travelling and with one of my really good friends, and we went to Australia. And I remember being in New Zealand, actually. We were in an all-you-can-eat sort of Chinese buffet. And I didn't even eat too much. I just ate normally, but never had I had this thought in my head before, but I just was compelled to go to the toilet and get rid of what I just consumed. And it kind of flicked a switch in my head that time. And ever since then, for the rest of the trip, it just got gradually worse. I never binged, but I would bring up whatever I had eaten. So I remember being on a plane on a connecting flight, and I just eaten a banana, and I had to go to the toilet on the plane. It just became crazy. And then I started to, my friend, it became quite noticeable to her, and she was getting concerned. And then something else switched, and I was just like, well, it's much easier just not to eat than having to keep going to the toilet when you're at restaurants and things. So then I just gradually reduced my intake, and it became so all-consuming. I couldn't eat carbs, I couldn't eat fat. It was just one thing slowly came out of my diet, and it was kind of towards the end of the journey. And when I came back to England, obviously I'd lost some weight, and everyone was like, oh, you look really great and, healthy, and I was kind of tanned. And that just kind of fueled my eating disorder in a way. And I suppose the difference between someone having an eating disorder and someone who goes on a diet is that most people on a diet eventually stop because it gets boring or it's too hard to stick with. But with an eating disorder, like, that choice is taken away from you. I had no choice. I was, by then, like, the terrorist is what I used to call it, had invaded my head, and I could not do anything about it. And so I couldn't stop. It just got more restrictive. I started exercising to compensate. I became a great liar. So I would, at the time I came back before I was going to university, and I had a job with some horses. So in the morning I would get up and muck out 5 horses. Then I'd drive to an Italian restaurant and say I'd eaten at the restaurant, go to the gym on the way home, then come get changed in my clothes, back in my work clothes, come home and say to my mum I'd eaten at the restaurant. So it was kind of like perfect excuse. I would throw food over the garden fence. I would hide it in my pockets. It was just, I just became like a compulsive liar. I would do anything to protect my eating disorder. And eventually, quite quickly, actually, it got, my mum and sister noticed that I was rapidly losing weight and that I just was getting more angry around food, and then obviously they intervened. But yeah, it was really that. I really think Michael's death was probably the catalyst. I think all the bits were there that, like, I have the characteristics of a perfectionist and wanting to achieve and being a people pleaser and all those kind of things. But I think it took, like, the perfect storm or something just to trip me. So I guess that was it, really.
And you mentioned the difference between an eating disorder and dieting. Were you someone who had previously dieted throughout your teenage years?
No, not really. I never really dieted. I just know that I had an uncomfortable feeling in my body of being too heavy. And I think being a bit bullied at college and not feeling like I fitted in, I just felt not okay. Like, I felt I was taking up too much space, I suppose, yeah. And I just sitting here now, I just can remember, like, going to the cupboards and even working. I worked in a supermarket, and ironically, I worked on the bakery department. And at the end of the shift, you could have all, like, the leftover things that gone out of date. And I remember we had these Smartie cookies. They were like cookies with big Smarties on them, and I would pick the Smarties off, and I would eat the Smarties. But I would say I was okay because I haven't eaten the cookie. was just that kind of thinking. It was just justifying stuff all the time to myself. Yeah, it was strange.
So when you then came back from that holiday, and you said your mom, like initially you got some compliments, but then your mom, your sister, and people started to worry. What were they then doing to intervene, and how long did it then take for you first to enter in some form of treatment, whatever treatment that was?
Well, I guess it would have been maybe 3 months or so since I came back from Australia. The weight drastically came off. And I mean, even then, this was sort of 10 years ago now. Like, even then, eating disorders were really not that talked about even then. And so I didn't even really know what was happening to me. And my family, my sister and my mum almost kind of became my parents after my stepdad died. Like, my dad was around, but not so much. And so I guess they frantically were looking at a thing, why was I not eating? And eventually, somehow, my dad at the time had private medical insurance, so I ended up going to two private treatment centres, the Priory. And neither of them really worked that well. One of them was pretty horrific, where I went for the day and my mum kind of stayed with me, but I remember I hadn't eaten properly for weeks, and they kind of made me eat a baked potato, and I just freaked out, cried. They wouldn't let me go to the toilet without being locked. It was like girls walking around on drips. It was terrifying. So I kind of begged for me not to go back. And ended up spending that summer before I went to university in another treatment centre. But I was the only one there with an eating disorder. All the others were either drug addiction or alcohol addiction, which when you kind of talk about mental health, that anyone who has a mental health issue, whether it is alcohol or drugs or an eating disorder or whatever it is, they all do stem from the same feelings of lack of self-worth and poor self-esteem, etc. But when you're treating them, they are quite different. So, for example, I would be sitting with my friend at the time, Isabel, who was an alcoholic, and I would go and get my lunch, and I would give half of my lunch to Isabel, and she would eat it, and the staff didn't really notice. So things like that, they didn't kind of give me a set meal plan. I could have kind of choose what I wanted, which really is not the way to treat an eating disorder. You can't give it that much of room, because it will just run a mile. And so whilst it did begin me to start talking about my feelings in the group sessions, etc., it was really only the beginning of even acknowledging what I had or what I was doing. So it was really valuable at times, but I came out of there just kind of a bit better adapted as I kind of talk about it like that. And I went to university, and it was, I don't know how I survived university really. I had to take some time off, and but I managed to complete my master's. But it was really difficult at times.
And at what point did you, like, initially you said these things just started to happen, and it spiraled, and you didn't know what an eating disorder was. It was 10 years ago. This stuff wasn't talked about. At what point did you recognize, okay, I do have an eating disorder, even if it took you many, many more years to get over it? At what point was there recognition of, okay, this is the problem?
Oh, I think when I was in the treatment centre for the summer, I acknowledged I think slowly I acknowledged I had an eating disorder. I learned more about it, and I realised it wasn't normal what I was doing. I just couldn't stop it. And I think, I don't know, in a way, I kind of, I guess it served me, and that's why I continued for a lot longer afterwards, because it got me attention from my dad, and I massively craved attention from my real dad. And suddenly I become thinner and fragile and weaker, and, the whole family were concerned about me. And eating sort of very much intertwined with wanting attention and feeling validated. And so, it kind of worked in a way. My dad did give me more attention. And so I think that kind of thinking just fueled it even more. And so I was well aware that I had an eating disorder. And, when I went to university, in fact, university was a really good time for me in many ways. It wasn't like college or school. I actually felt like I fitted in at university. I went to, an art college by the beach, and I kind of felt like, I guess I found my tribe, as it were. Like I have, lots of people there had stuff, like they had issues and things, and maybe that's what an art college attracts. I don't know, people by the beach, I don't know. But instead of going in the city or something, I don't know. But I had really good friendships there, and a lot of, my best friend was really accepting of my eating disorder. She suffered from depression. I did have a boyfriend while I was there. But, it was difficult. I remember walking up and down the high street, looking for the lowest calorie can of soup and crazy things like, my flat was opposite Woolworths, which now sadly doesn't exist, but they had the pick and mix, and I would just go over there and buy like a small bag of like boiled sweets and take them back into my room and drink pints of hot Ribena and the boiled sweets to keep me going. It was just like ridiculous. And I suppose when you're at university, you go out a lot. So I guess I drank more alcohol, and the sugar and that kept me going. So I survived on very little food, to be honest. And eventually that can become quite testing on a boyfriend. And that my eating disorder was pretty much the reason why we probably split up the way we did. But, it was a good place for many reasons. But I really just was a better adapted anorexic, as it were.
Okay. And look, there's something I want to highlight from what you said, which is anorexics or anorexia is a coping mechanism, and it is something that in some ways helps people. And I'm a big believer in that people keep their problems for a reason. And when I'm working with clients around stuff like this, it's starting to not jump in with how do we change that, but look at, okay, what is this genuinely doing for you? Because if you try and remove someone's crutch and you don't understand what it's holding up for someone, then it's not going to last very long, and people are just going to reach for that same crutch. So starting to understand, as you did, in terms of wanting to get validation, wanting that attention from your dad, etc., I think is a really important part of starting to uncover how someone can recover, because you know what why they're really doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the biggest things that I learned in America, so I went to a place called Montenegro, which was founded by an amazing lady called Carolyn Costin. And she talks a lot about, what are you recovering to, not what you're recovering from. And when you have an eating disorder, you can't just take the disorder away and leave nothing there. Otherwise, why would you give it up if there was nothing to replace it? And she talks about, what are you recovering to? And it's, what are you going to put in your life that is going to help you continue to not need your unhealthy coping mechanisms. And it was a really huge thing for me, because I was always like, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to be empty. I'm going to, I'm giving this up, but what am I going to have instead? And, recovery obviously gives you so much more. But at the time you have no idea that you're actually going to gain anything. It's like you think you're going to get a bad financial deal,
Yeah.
And it takes someone to show you why it's worth recovering to. And that was the magic nugget, I guess, in the treatment center I went to, because I had the psychologists, the dietitians, the therapists. I'd had all that for years, but I'd never had anyone who could say, hey, I've been there. I've been you, but my God, like this is my life now, and it's so much better. And Carolyn, she had anorexia, and what she created in Montenegro was a place she'd had wished would have been there when she was trying to get well. And she filled it with people that she calls guides, and some of the staff have recovered from an eating disorder. My therapist over there had recovered from an eating disorder, and so she was kind of a walking, talking inspiration for me, and learning from her, and gradually putting into place things that were worth recovering to, became more attractive than staying where I was. So I think you're totally right. You have to really work towards, giving the tools really and giving inspiration as to why it's better to live another way.
And I mean, that treatment center, I know for you was really the pinnacle, and it's the thing that has turned everything around for you. You've alluded to a couple of points there about why it was so influential. I mean, what could be changed in the places in the UK or the other treatment centres that you went to that could have then had that same influence on you? Are there other pieces to it that were really influential?
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about this, I always want to say, I feel like I need to put a caveat in that, not everyone who is recovered from an eating disorder has to have gone to Montenegro, because that's definitely not true. You can definitely recover without going there. So I only speak about my experience. But for me, I'd got to the point where I'd had my eating disorder for 11 years. It was incredibly entrenched in my thinking. So for me, the treatment I'd had over here was generally, I was referred on the NHS to the NHS eating disorders clinic here, and I had a dietitian for a bit, but he I don't know whether it was my head where I was at the time, but I didn't connect with him. And then I had an assessment for the actual inpatient unit, and they have like 12 beds there, which serves the whole of North London. And I was offered about 30 minutes every 6 weeks. And that, that was never going to get to anywhere near to cutting through while I was doing what I was doing. So we had to, what we could afford, we paid privately. And that was often like a day centre where I would go for 3 times a week, and then I would go home. But like I said, it was so entrenched in me, I would go to the centre, but then I'd come home and I wasn't able to eat the food. You talk about all these emotional things in the group therapy, and then you have to go home and eat your food plan. And I just couldn't do it. For me, I needed to be contained 24/7 and eat the food whilst having to go through all the difficult feelings and emotions I was feeling, and the grief that I was feeling around my stepdad, and everything. And so I guess I had to be contained, but being contained in an environment that is tough. They were pretty strict with me, but they were nurturing, and it was it wasn't clinical. So I've even done talks over here in treatment centres since I've been back, and you walk into them, and they're just not inspiring places.
Yeah.
It just doesn't breathe energy or kindness or laughter or fun. It's just like a hospital. It smells like that. I can't describe it, but when you walk in Montenegro, it's just a house. It's like a house. She bought a normal house, and it feels very much like that. So it's very warm and loving, and you get to go in the kitchen, and the staff, you joke around with them. I think here there's a lot of boundaries between you and between the staff, whereas they're very clever in as much as they're not your friends, but they are in a way. So we would, drive in my therapist's car, Lindsay's car, and we would go to the beach, or we'd go for hikes or something. But we'd play cool music in the car and stuff. So it was kind of there were the things that inspired you. So when Lindsay went home, she left for the day. I was like, oh God damn it, I want to go out and have a boyfriend and have a dog at my apartment and be able to go to the beach. And so after a while, I was like, this is not fun staying in this house. I want to be in the real world. But at the same time, they were also very tough. So they understood, all the tricks of the trade that I was pulling. So, for the first month, I think I literally cried my way through every meal. And part of that was attention. I wanted the attention. So there were 6 of us that would sit around the table. And at first they kind of, would be very supportive. And then gradually they clocked on that actually if they didn't give me that attention, they were feeding the attention to my eating disorder. They weren't giving it to me. And so after a while, I realised that actually I just had to get on with this. And so, it was the difference, I guess, is that they just knew. They knew because they'd been through it. And Carolyn had taught them well because she'd been through it. And their philosophy is just completely different. It's just they cook with you. There's a level system, so you have to adhere to certain things to go through the levels, and it's very much about being part of your peers and using them for your help and support system, and owning your feelings. So we would have sessions as a group, but it was very it was unhierarchical. So the therapist there would be very much on your page and your same wavelength. It's hard to explain, but only from what I've experienced over here in comparison, it's just so much further in their forward thinking over there, I guess.
And so how long were you there for in total?
So I was there for about 7.5 months. So like 6 months in the house. And then I had a month and a half in the transition house, which is a house that you move into. So you can kind of live your own life, but you go back to the treatment centre for your sessions and things. So it kind of helps you to transition. And ideally I would have stayed out there for a bit longer, because only a month there, I don't know, probably wasn't, I could have benefited from more, but, finances and visa issues, and I came home, and, in the end I had to be incredibly grateful for the time I did have, because it was financially a huge sacrifice for my mum, who sold her house to fund my stay there. And I think part of that has always, knowing that I could never go back, because that opportunity will never be available to us again, kind of has helped me to keep on track, if you know what I mean. And there were girls over there that were very wealthy, and they could stay for a lot longer. And I'm not entirely sure if that, to have an indefinite period of time that you can stay somewhere is helpful really in the long term. It gives comfort to know that you're not suddenly going to have to leave tomorrow, but also you do have to re-enter the real world at some point. And the longer you are institutionalized, as it were, the harder that can be to transition. So I was incredibly grateful for the time I had there, and I'm still very much part of the community. And I'm doing my own course with Carolyn now and stuff. And she doesn't just you don't just leave Montenegro. It's like there's a whole alumni and retreats and stuff, and she continues to connect with every single person that walks through her doors, which is a lot. And
so how was the transition when you came back to
really
the UK,
hard.
And then did you then slot back into working or getting the job then at the BBC?
Oh, it was really hard coming back, actually. Terrifying. Maybe it was more terrifying than going, I think. I came back, and there was nowhere. That's the problem. There was nowhere really that I could go to over here that was even remotely on the same page as Montenegro. So I did go to somewhere in London for a couple of months. I really disliked it, like massively disliked it. It followed the 12-step program, which I don't believe works for eating disorders. So I was already, and probably if I'm honest, I had a bit of an attitude. I was like, well, you're not Montenegro, you don't really know. Yeah. And I had to get my head around that. But so I left there. I didn't continue going there. And then I went to another place, which in the end I just thought, I have to just get on with this.
It seemed to cut out for a second there. So you said I went to another place, and then it just went blank.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so I went to another place, which also wasn't really that helpful. It was better than the place I had been to, but it got to a point where I thought I have to just get on with this and really utilize the tools that I had learnt. And I made sure I kept in touch with the girls that I was in the house with, and my therapist. And going back to work was, so they kept my job open for me at the BBC, and it was really difficult walking back into that office. Obviously, I people come and go in that office so often that you could be away for 6 months and people don't often notice. But I guess a lot of them knew where I'd been. And I sat, they were kind of very kind to me and let me get my foot kind of back in the door and feel comfortable. But after about 4 weeks of sitting behind my desk and not really doing very much, I thought, well, I didn't recover or spend the last 7 months in another country to come back and just potter about at work. And so I sat there and I thought, I need to come up with something. So I pitched an idea, which my editor was like, are you sure you're okay to do this? And I was like, yeah, I think so. I did it, and I pulled it off, and that gave me huge confidence to do something else, and that really catapulted a lot of my recovery. I realized that going out of my comfort zone was actually at times what I needed to do, and there was a personal responsibility for my recovery. So I talk quite a lot about mental health in the workplace now, and there is a thing that I really feel strongly about is personal responsibility versus corporate responsibility. So as long as you are supported, then that should enable you to be able to do things at work if you feel able to talk about your mental health and you feel supported in it. So that, the BBC have been really great to me, and I was very fortunate. So that kind of helped the transition, I guess. But I did find it hard with my friends a little bit. Like, at first it's a bit like when someone dies, I guess. Everyone rallies around you at first, and then slowly it trickles off, I guess. And so when I came back, it was, I caught up with a lot of people, and then you really are left with the reality of your own. And the eating disorder is there sitting on your shoulder, just waiting to catch you. And I felt a bit lonely at times. I desperately wanted to go back to America. I guess I was a bit resentful that nothing over here was the same. And then I was like, I stopped. I guess I went into a bit of a dark place of feeling like what I hadn't got instead of trying to look at what I had got. And then I kind of gave myself a kick up the backside and was like, look, you are really lucky that you have this place. You now have the opportunity to make a life. And so that's kind of what I did. And so that was 5 years ago now. And it's not been easy, but it's definitely possible.
And so you mentioned about mental health, and I know this is something that you've brought up with work. So do you want to talk a little about what you've done in that area, and when did that first happen, and how easy was it for you to talk about? Yeah, just a bit of detail around all of that.
Well, I guess my eating disorder at work had been a bit of an elephant in the room. It's an elephant in the room everywhere. So people knew that I'd been away, and they knew I had it, but I'd never really talked about it publicly. And that comes from, shame. I felt that if I talked about it at work publicly, I would be judged. I would be thought of differently. And also I was really worried about my career, if I'm honest. There's still a huge stigma around mental health, and I didn't really, I'd say it's ironic because with an eating disorder, you want to be treated differently because you want to feel special and attention. But at the same time, I didn't want to be treated any differently. And I felt a bit weak, I suppose. I felt a bit vulnerable, and my eating disorder had always been something that was mine. It's really hard to explain, but it's like the one thing that you have that no one can take away from you. So I felt like if I put myself out there like an open book, well then it was no longer a secret, it was no longer mine. But I also at the same time thought, I've come back and I've had this experience and this opportunity, and I felt like it was my duty in a way to share my story and to be brave enough to let go of that stigma and shame that I held for myself. And so an opportunity came up with an editor at work who had suffered from depression and had gone with the BBC to America to look into how workplaces were handling mental health. And when he came back, he put out an email asking if anyone would be willing to share their experience. So I thought, right, this is it. This is my opportunity. So I contacted him. We had coffee, and I said, yeah, I'm happy to share my story. In the end, there were like 6 of us. We all had different experiences of mental health. There was OCD, depression, etc. And we filmed ourselves talking about it, and it went up on the internal the intranet. And we kind of launched it. It was a similar campaign to the Heads Together campaign that the royal family did. And we called it Open Up. And I really talked about my eating disorder and thought, right, gosh, it's going to go out on the internet now. And then you kind of wait and you think, maybe no one will see it. Maybe someone will think you're crazy what you said, or maybe you hope you might get some positive feedback. And all I got was positive feedback. It was, I had people contact me and say, I've suffered with an eating disorder. I don't know who to talk to. They were just really glad that I shared my story. And so after that, I felt so much more, I felt a bit liberated, if I'm honest. And it was like a relief that I wasn't holding this thing anymore and I could just talk about it. And then after that, I've done a lot more within the BBC. I'm currently trying to develop even more in creating awareness. I still feel like there is a huge stigma around the difference between physical and mental health. Even as recent as this week, I had a girl contact me who suffers really badly with anxiety, and she has admitted to me that she's called up and phoned in sick on several occasions, not because she's got anything physically wrong with her, but because her anxiety is so bad. But she's called up and said, I've got a stomach bug or something, because she fears that, you can't just phone up and say my head hurts like you can say my stomach hurts. And that is what I really am trying to change. Like, physical and mental health are not exclusive of one another. But I, even myself, I feel would feel far more ashamed to phone up and, call in sick and just say, I'm suffering today. I don't feel like I can come in, because you worry that it will ruin your career, or you won't be promoted, or your boss will think, oh my God, just snap out of it or get on with it. And so there is that culture. It still exists in many workplaces. And that's something that I feel so passionately about trying to change. So I feel like the conversation we opened up there within that campaign, but I feel like actual practical strategies and action is not as advanced as the actual conversation we have around it.
And does it feel like the BBC is a good workplace to be doing this stuff in? Like, does it feel like quite a progressive place?
Yeah, I mean, everyone knows now that I do this work outside and within the BBC. I'm doing a big conference, a mental health in the workplace conference, as a representative of the BBC in September. And yeah, I mean, I've done interviews on the BBC. I mean, yeah, they are supportive. And I totally openly talk about it now. It's actually, I don't obviously volunteer it to the first person I meet, but I feel like whenever I've shared my experience, it has often encouraged someone else to share their experience. So I don't think this person who talked about their anxiety to me would have possibly felt so comfortable talking to me if I hadn't expressed or shared my battles with mental health. And that is really the power of connecting with someone else and sharing is just huge. And that is another thing Carolyn always said, you have to, relationships need to be bigger than your eating disorder, and that's what will keep you well. And just by sharing and opening and talking about it is such a powerful tool for another person to feel that they can, because you can just feel so alone. Like I remember, I'd be in London, it's like one of the biggest cities and millions of people around me, but I felt so alone because I was alone in my eating disorder in my head. And I guess all I wanted was to speak to someone or connect with someone who spoke my language or who really understood. Like, unless it's like, you have a broken leg. I can't really relate to someone who's got a broken leg if I haven't experienced it myself. And it's the same with, a mental health issue. And, finally, when I read a book of Carolyn's, and I'm not a huge, I know I talk about her a lot and I'm not like sort of a puff piece for her, but it's my, it's all the experience I've had really. And I remember opening and reading the first 3 pages of her book in my flat in London. And I just burst into tears because it was just such a relief that someone finally got me, like at the level that I just thought no one ever could. And that, you really, mental health, like it's just something that we all have. And I don't know why we're still deemed, there's still sort of the language and the images that are used around mental health, they're still quite negative, but it's not something that, I have. I feel like everybody has mental health. It's just, on a different level or different, it's not something that doesn't exist for everybody.
Yeah. So you're doing some work as well with the Prince's Trust. I think it's stuff around confidence and identity. Are you able to talk about that?
Yeah, so I guess when the Jigsaw platform where people share their stories started to really take off, I realised that a lot of things that were, people started contacting me on email. It all kind of had a similar theme. I felt like everyone was kind of really suffering from a lack of inner confidence or self-worth, and struggling with their identity of who they were, what their place was in the world. And so I kind of thought, what did I learn in America and how can I put this into practice? Because, my eating disorder was just my vehicle for how I expressed the turmoil that was going on inside me. But, it comes out in all sorts of ways. And I really thought it was a huge identity crisis I had, and low self-worth and self-esteem. And I really want to, I'm really passionate about getting involved with young people and trying to be proactive and not reactive. And I feel like if I had learned, some of the tools that I have now when I was at school or, in my early years, then perhaps it wouldn't, I don't know, who knows, perhaps I wouldn't have developed such a severe eating disorder. So I put together, like a bit of a program, and then, I went to meet a couple of charities, and the Prince's Trust, they run a great program for 18 to 25-year-olds, I think, and it's, people who haven't got opportunities, the opportunities that many of us have the luxury of having, of going to university and getting a job, and, many of them have low confidence. And so I just, I go in now and I do a workshop, and it combines many of the exercises and stories that I learnt when I was in America. And part of it is I get them to create their jigsaw, their own jigsaw, which is always a really powerful part of the day. Many of them are quite reluctant at first to sit down and artwork a feeling or something, but once they get going, I mean, you can't really stop them. And then we share them afterwards. And some of the stories that come out and the secrets that they've never shared before. And it's huge. It's really huge. And there's people that get angry, and there's people who have tears and things. But it's such a cathartic exercise. And I feel like it gives them, an avenue where they can really express how they're feeling in a different format. So that's something that I do, and it works. I've done it within schools, and I'm going to some universities in the north next week, and I've done it with a couple of companies. It doesn't really mental health affects everybody at every age, and so that's some of the work I've been doing. I feel really passionate about the pressures that young people have on them these days, which weren't really around so much when I was struggling. And so I don't know how people these days navigate their way through life when the comparisons and the judgments on social media are so huge. It's a pretty tough world to grow up in these days, and I feel like if we could provide them with some of the internal resources to draw on to kind of support them, perhaps our young people wouldn't grow up to be so stressed as they are, and mental health is just on the increase, it's not on the decrease.
Yeah. And look, I definitely think about that a lot. I think we're both in the mid-30s or latter part of our 30s to think about being a teenager again or 18 again. There is no amount of money that would make me want to make that trade, just because of how different life is now versus what it was like back then. Yeah, I mean, it is incredible, and technology, and I mean, social media is great, and I can't say I'm against it, completely, because I use it as part of the, my Instagram is where it visually is the best place to put people's jigsaws, and I've made some great friends from around the world through social media. But it took me a while to really find and hone down the people that I wanted, the communities that were aligned to my values, and that can be quite difficult when you are so, when you're young and you're influenced. And I think, when I was struggling with my eating disorder, I would have been really vulnerable and susceptible into connecting with people that were really not healthy for me. And I think that is the real dangers of social media. And
And so I talk a lot about, who are your influences and who are your role models outside of, social media. Like, like I talk a lot about just people close to home, like friends and, my family, people who are, to me, like my mum is a hero, but, as much as opposed to some sort of celebrity, which young people are really, really influenced heavily by. And I also talk about, for me, the value of being in nature and having space, like, physical space to me is huge. And connecting with nature and being outside and animals and horses, that is a thing for me that has been such a huge part of my recovery. I can't tell you, it's just something that keeps me grounded and motivated and inspired and at peace. And so I try and say, get outside, don't sit on your laptop or your computer. And yeah.
So you've made reference numerous times to the Jigsaws or Jiggsy's Place, which is the company that you run. So can you explain what the Jigsaws are? Because I think when I hear the name Jigsaw, I have a thought in my mind, and then when I see what's actually on Instagram, it's slightly different to that. So maybe explain it for people who haven't come across the concept and what it means.
Yeah, sure. So it came about, when I was about 18 months back, maybe 2 years back from treatment, and I just met my boyfriend at the time, and we were in my flat, and he kind of said, well, I think maybe you should, why are you not talking about your experience or doing something? Or he asked me, what would you have hoped had existed when you were struggling? And I said, God, I just felt a real sadness that I just didn't fit in anywhere. And I felt alone, and there was nowhere for me to share my story or my experiences or my feelings. But I know I felt like I couldn't be alone. So the crazy things I did, like, there were stories of my dad chasing me around the supermarket with a luxury yogurt because I wouldn't eat it. And like I threw hot Weetabix against the wall in rage, and, my mum finding chicken drumsticks in the garden fence. And I thought, God, like, this is what an eating disorder can make you do. But I was like, I'm sure I'm not alone in this. So I thought and then when I went onto social media, I thought, when I was specifically looking sort of eating disorders communities, everything I found was, either people had put up transformation pictures, so like underweight, skinny, to how they are now, or they'd turned into like fitness experts or something, or they documented their food. So there'd be lots of pictures of food. And I was like, oh, geez, this is like alien to me now. I've come from a place where I have learned who I am without my eating disorder, and there's so much more to me than my eating disorder. But no one was really sharing that. Like it was, and so I kind of was like, but I wanted to create a place where people could share who they were without their, doctoring themselves in some sort of transformation or showing me all their food. I was like, you are way more than your food. Food is a tiny bit of your recovery in reality. And I also wanted somewhere people could be anonymous if they wanted to. So, some people feel very ashamed still or to share things. And I felt like, well, if there was a place where they could feel safe and not non-judged. So I called it Jiggsy because I wanted to create a jigsaw, one big jigsaw where everyone fitted in, because I never fitted in. So each jigsaw piece is like, your piece of the puzzle. And if you put them all together, it grows one big jigsaw where everyone feels connected. So another, I look at one person's piece and read their story and be like, oh, I felt like that. And it might connect you and make you feel less alone. So it's a visual representation, and it can be an artwork. It could be a digitally produced piece. It can be a drawing, a painting, a collage, a photo. And then people send them to me with a little story about what that image represents to them, and they can leave it anonymous or they can share their name. And I post them pretty much. I don't edit them. I post them as they're sent to me. And I have, people send me jigsaws from all around the world now, a lot in America, some from Australia, a lot from England, obviously. And yeah, I've had a great response to it, really, I guess. So does that kind of understand. It's called Jigsaw because it's one big jigsaw. Everyone feels connected by sending in their pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, no, it does. And it makes sense once I went to your Instagram account, but I guess just hearing the name Jigsaw Pieces, I was just visualizing something that looked like a piece of a jigsaw when actually it was more a meme or a collage or a drawing, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and the great thing is people don't send me pictures of food and stuff, and they usually share a feeling or an emotion or a secret that actually tells me about themselves, or tells the community about who they are. And at the beginning, it was very much associated with eating disorders, but now, I have people that share all sorts of things, lots of mental health issues, all diverse issues. Race issues, it's not eating disorder exclusive at all anymore. In all age ranges, I've had people in their 60s and like in their teens send me stuff. So I feel really grateful for the people who have contributed. I really do.
And one of the things you said just before was your boyfriend had asked you, what do you wish had been around when you had your eating disorder? And maybe a similar question that I want to ask is, what do you wish that either friends or family had said if they had known, that you think would have been really helpful, if there is anything?
Gosh, it's difficult because at the time when my family started to talk to me about it, I was so resistant. I was like, I didn't want help. I was like, just leave me to this eating disorder. I'm fine. I don't get out of my face. I was pretty horrible at times, and I'm actually quite, I'm quite a quiet person, very non-confrontational, but I turned into some sort of monster. And so I don't really know. It's a hard one. People often ask me, what could they have said? And at the time, really, at the beginning, I don't think anyone could have changed my mind. I wanted to do what I was doing, or I didn't know how to live in any other way. I felt totally consumed by this monster. It's only then when you start to talk a little bit more, and acknowledge that, you realize what you've got and your eating disorder and what it is. And that I guess now I can look at when I talk to people who have eating disorders now, I often feel the frustration that my own family did. Like my mum and dad, like, come on, just eat. When you're watching someone you love actively kill themselves, it's really painful, frustrating. And I can imagine they felt like they wanted to give up at times, but after 11 years, you think nothing's going to change. So when I speak to people now, I often share that frustration that please don't waste another day or another hour with this thing that will give you in the long term nothing. It will take everything away from you. In the end, I lost everything almost. I couldn't ride my horse. I was no chance going to have a boyfriend or any potential family opportunities. My job was, if I worked anywhere else other than, the BBC, I probably would have been sacked. I had no friends. But at the time, you can't really realise that. You don't think about it. And so, I even spoke to someone the other day from a charity that I work for, and she's quite young. And I was like, would you be willing to come in and meet with your care worker and I next week? And she was like, well, what to talk about? And I said, we just wanted to give you some support. And, maybe, I can talk to you about my experience. She was like, well, I don't want to come if you want to make me gain weight because I don't want to. And I was like, I'm not going to, that was not my intention at all. But her mindset is so far from wanting to be helped right now. And so when you're in that place, it's quite hard to tap into them. But I guess all you can do is never give up. Just don't judge them. Don't try and make them do anything, because that will never work. It only pushes them away. But constantly just give them hugs. Love, basically. That's all you can give them. And hope that you guide them in the right direction. Offer them the support. Find the right places that can give that support. And they will come to it eventually. But I do think the longer I had it, probably the harder it is to reverse. And also having your eating disorder, I guess I was a late age. Many people develop it when you're younger, but I guess having it through your 20s and even into your 30s is very different from having it when you're 13, 14 or 15. And And so you have to really, really choose your language very carefully.
And you mentioned about the Carolyn Costin book being really big for you in terms of you reading that and bursting into tears because it spoke to you. It was like she was reading your mind. Yeah. If that book had arrived to you when you were 22, 23, like still in the early stages or maybe a year or two into it, do you think you would have been open there, or it took for you to be at the end of your tether and it had been going on for so long to then be open to that?
Yeah, I think I grew tired of being tired. I grew tired of being sick as well. I mean, everybody comes to that point at a different time, and they talk about rock bottoms, and I've had a few of those before. Like, but this time when I was 28, I just thought, my God, I'm nearly 30. I've missed a whole decade. Am I going to go into the next decade being like this? I either want to die or I have to change this, because that was how hideous my life had become. I felt physically ill all the time. Mentally, I think, if physically I hadn't have killed myself, I think mentally my head would have blown. I just couldn't continue anymore. And maybe it was the length of time I'd had it. I don't know. I mean, I was terrified of getting on that plane and giving up. I had to hand in my phone, my laptop. I didn't really take any clothes. You walk in and you're stripped of everything, really. And it was hard. It was really hard. There were times when they were going to send me home because they thought I was too much. I wasn't playing part of the program. I resisted everything at first. But then slowly it clicked. And they never gave up on me. And I guess it's that feeling of knowing that someone will never give up on you, that you have hope. And I often talk about, there's two things I think of. One, it's a bit cheesy, but there's a Robbie Williams song, and it says, I don't want to die, but I'm not keen on living either. And I felt like that was very much my life. I didn't really want to die, but I really didn't want to live either. So I was kind of in no man's land for so long. And I felt like there was so much bad stuff in me that had to come out before I could even begin to heal, because I wanted to punish myself. I felt guilt around my stepdad's death, and I felt like I needed to repent. I felt like I was a bad daughter, I just hated myself. And the film The Green Mile always resonates with me because the character in there, the kind of the black guy, he sucks all this poisonous stuff out of Tom Hanks, and I felt like I needed that. I needed all this like stuff sucked out of me before I could really heal. It's kind of an analogy that, kind of the only way I can describe how much bad stuff I had in me. I felt like I was rotten, really. So yeah, that's kind of what I guess I needed, and Montenegro provided that for me. And they were so caring and non-judgmental, and I guess that's how I would want people to feel now, not judged but understood.
So we've talked about your story. We've talked about the work you've done at the BBC around mental health and with the Prince's Trust and with Jiggsy's Place. Is there any other work that you want to mention that you're currently involved in that we haven't spoken about that you think is relevant?
I'm involved in several conferences coming up, which is where I am going to be talking about mental health in the workplace and what really, why nature really helps me to heal. There's a book potential that I might be looking into. And yeah, I'm just continuing doing my work with young people and just trying to just share my story and encourage others to do the same. I feel like the more people that will talk about it and not feel ashamed about it, the better it can be. We are getting there, but it's just it's still very, very difficult to access certain people. So I am working on a project within the BBC actually, which I've got commissioned, which I pitched, which is looking at eating disorders within hidden communities. And the idea came to me because I was speaking at an event a month or so ago, and I spoke to a group of Black African women about what I was talking about, my story, etc., while I was there. And they shared with me that, eating disorders really exist in the Black community, but they feel that they can't talk about it, so they self-harm instead. And that was such a shocking thing I heard, and it made me think about other communities where people feel like they can't talk about their mental health or eating disorders. And for me, as a white middle-class girl, I guess I'm the typical person who you might think of having an eating disorder. And for me, there are fortunately quite a few role models or people who have openly talked about it in the public. But for these communities, and I'm talking about, all sorts of, Asian communities, Indian communities, Jewish communities, I've now connected with many, many people who feel that they, because of their culture or their religion, they just can't talk about it, and there aren't any role models for them. And so I'm going to be working on that in the next couple of months. Hopefully that will be commissioned and I'll have that put out on some platforms. I feel like it's a really sad place that, that so many people feel they have to hide it and revert to other forms of self-harm to cope with their feelings. So so that's coming up. That's quite exciting. I just want to talk about it as much as possible now. For someone who never wanted to talk about it, I feel like I don't really stop talking about it.
the floodgates have opened.
Yeah. And I write I do a lot of blogs for other people and things, but I feel really grateful now. I feel in a great, I do feel liberated, and it's a relief, and slowly but surely, even this last year, I've written pieces that I would never have talked about before. So I wrote about a piece for a publication in Canada about sex in relationships. I've talked about, why I still take antidepressants, and they were all things. They were little bits that I still kept hidden, I guess. And it's difficult writing them and then hitting send, because you think, oh gosh, now I've done it. I've really done it. But at the same time, it's quite liberating, and it feels like, I don't have to have these secrets anymore. I'm not a secretive person yet. My eating disorder made me so secretive. And so, yeah, it's been a great journey, and I still learn stuff every day about where I'm at. And not every day is great at all, but there are so many more great days than there are bad days these days. And I enjoy life. Like I love being in the world today and meeting people and talking to people and having a relationship and enjoying food and not isolating myself because of it, and not, I couldn't even imagine going away for the weekend before, and now I'm going on holiday and I don't really think of the food. It's like, that's not what I think about. Whereas I think about how I'm going to have a good time and all the things that normal people do, like what am I going to pack, or what am I going to wear, or where are we going to go, what exciting things can we see? Whereas before I'd be like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I can't take my food. They're going to cook. It was just so tragic. It was so sad, and that's just not where I'm at these days. And it's almost, I feel like it's a miracle, Chris, if I'm honest. Like I was the hopeless case. I wanted to give up. I thought I've had every treatment under the sun. I'm just never going to get it. And for me to sit here and think, and feel so much more at peace in myself, and connected with myself, and then in turn connected with others, it is no short of a miracle for me. And I'm so grateful to my family who made that possible for me to go to America. And I guess if you want to know my long-term goal, my like actual real thing I want to create, I want to open a Montenegro over here. I desperately feel like we don't have anything. Caroline often says, she'll email me and say, who would you recommend? I've got a couple of people and clients that need some help in London. And she emailed me 2 weeks ago, and I could only think of 2. And they're, individual therapists, but there's no sort of place that I would really recommend that you could go and spend time at, and in a healing environment that makes you want to live. So for me, one day it's a dream for me to open up a place that represents my values and those values and the philosophy and what I've learned. And I'd love to be able to create a space like that for other people, and for to get rid of the financial burden that is placed on families. Treatment over here is it's expensive, and I know that I never want to slate the NHS, because I do know people who have got well on the NHS. I really do, but it's very much your postcode lottery, and there are long waiting lists, and often the treatment you get is disconnected. So if you don't have money, then what are the options? If you literally can't pay for a therapy session, what are the options? There are so many people out there suffering with eating disorders of all sizes, and you don't have to be a certain weight to have an eating disorder. And the criteria at the moment for being admitted to a hospital over here is, you have to have a ridiculously low BMI.
Yeah.
And that is just crazy. That's probably why I didn't get admitted, or or there was a huge waiting list or something. But it just gives the sufferer the message that you're not worth it, or that you're not ill enough. And an eating disorder, you can be a completely healthy weight, overweight. It doesn't discriminate against any gender. Men get eating disorders. There's women, kids, elderly people. It's just does not discriminate. And it also operates out of office hours. Mental health is not a 9-to-5 job, and the services here are not able, the resources aren't there, they're not equipped, and even the treatment you do get, I think, is far from adequate. And so even privately, even if you can afford it, I don't feel that it's massively helpful over here at times. And so I would one day, one day, that's my dream, to create a place that inspires and heals the mind, the body, and the soul as a whole being, not just focuses on the food. So yeah, if you want to know my long-term goal, that's it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that is a great long-term goal. So look, you have been very generous with your time, and it's really been lovely chatting with you, and you being so honest in terms of sharing your story and everything you've been through. And just before we wrap this up, can you tell people where they can go and find out more about you, like website, social media? And I'm going to put all this in the show notes, and I'm going to also find out some of the articles you made reference to a couple of moments ago, and also put them in the show notes. But yeah, just tell people where they can go to.
Yeah, sure. So my website is www.jiggsy'splace.com, and there you will see some posts, all my blog posts, and some of the press articles that I've done, and a link to my YouTube channel where I've done some interviews, and the Jigsaw, which is the most important thing. That's where you'll see all the jigsaws, and you can send me your jigsaw, which I would love people to send me their jigsaws. You can send them via the website, or you can also go onto my Instagram, which is Jiggsy's Place, and you'll see them there. And in my bio, there's my email, which is connect@jiggsy'splace.com. So you can send it to me there, or you can direct message me them. And I'm on Twitter at Jiggsy's Place, and Facebook, Jiggsy's Place. So yeah, you can find me and everything about the jigsaw. And if you have any questions then, or you're unsure as to what you do with the jigsaw or whatever, then, just send me via email. But there is a little video and a diagram as to, you basically think of your feeling or secret, share it, choose your material, send it to me, and I publish it.
Perfect. Well, Laura, thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a lovely conversation, and I know people are going to get a lot out of it.
Thank you so much, Chris. I really appreciate your time, and I just want everyone to know that recovery is totally possible.
Thanks for listening.